Hi, I'm Corey. Welcome to Creating with Scraps. In my recent post-retreat video, I had shared some one-sheet wonders that I had created. This first one was based on a folio that I had seen on Camelia Crafts channel, and I will link that below afterwards. I'll come back and edit and link it. And it's a great one-sheet wonder, and the reason for those of you who are new, it's called a one-sheet wonder, is you create this using one sheet of 12 by 12 paper. Now, granted, there are more things than that, like these hinges probably were added after, and then these little whale tail punches were added after. Obviously, they're out of a different sheet, but the majority of the project is done with one sheet. And again, I will show how I did that. And on my video, I showed that I'd used this one and made a different one. I used the same basic formula, but I changed it up a little bit, only having one of these hinged flaps on it and cutting up the pieces to make this. And somebody said, well, there's no way you got the second one out of the first one. Well, I did. And the reason is the scores are essentially the same. You can see if you line them up. The scores are essentially at the same places. It's just what you do with the flaps, the leftover pieces of scored, that are slightly different. And so I'm going to show you how I did that. Now, keep in mind, this is the one I originally made, and I'm going to alter it slightly. And my reasoning for altering it slightly is this. I am going to do a journal using 5 of these one-sheet wonders, and I want them all to be the same height. So I altered it slightly to make them the same height. This one, the original one, is identical, except this is 5 inches rather than the 5.5 inches I want. And it has 2 tuck spots on the back, 2 side tuck spots. And then on the very back, it has another tuck spot. Well, in order to make the dimensions work, I changed this one ever so slightly. Everything is essentially the same. It has the same fold and pocket on the back. The front is the same. The inside is the same with a tuck spot. You open it up. You have a little sewn-in notebook, which is completely optional. You have a center pocket. And then over here is where I changed it. The previous one had 2 side tucks. This one has a side tuck and a side pocket. So you've still got 2 places to put things. I just changed where they were. And the same thing is true back here. You actually have another pocket because that one had 1 side tuck. And then there's the pocket here. So I'm going to show you how to make this one. All right. The first thing you need is a piece of double-sided 12 by 12 paper and a scoreboard or a ruler and lines and a way to score it. I like using non-directional paper for this simply because you don't have to worry as much about your orientation, because some of these pieces are going to fold down, so they're going to be upside down. And a lot of the Tim Holtz paper, some of it is directional. And like if you were to look at this, you'd say, yeah, that's probably the correct direction, but it looks equally good this way, and it looks equally good this way, and all the way around. And the same is true for the other side. While it's clearly intended to quote unquote go this way, it works great this way too, and this way. So there's no wrong way to do it, which is my preference. All right, let me make sure I've got the little post-it note that tells me where to score. Okay, this is the one for the Camelia Crafts book, and this is the one for this one. All right, because like I said, I changed the measurements just slightly. All right, I'll put it up here, and I will try to remember to put the dimensions or where the score lines are in the description box below. For those of you who aren't familiar with the description box, when you look at the video, in the center, below the video, but in the center top, there is the title of the video, the author, that type of thing. On the far right side, there's a little down arrow, basically, and that allows you to access this description box. And sometimes in there it'll say read more. But that, if you push that, that'll give you a drop-down menu, and that'll allow you to see all the directions, and that'll have the dimensions as well as the link to the Camelia Crafts video. All right, first dimensions, 4 1/8, 8 1/4. So vertical. First thing you've got to do is decide, what do I want to be my vertical? How do I want to orient this? And then, like I said, on this one, I'm pretty lucky. It doesn't really matter. It's going to look pretty good no matter what I do. Whichever's going to be dropped down, it's going to work. So I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to call this my vertical. All right, because remember, this is the piece that's going to drop down and show. So my vertical scores are going to be at 4 1/8 and 8 1/4. So 4 1/8. If you have this particular scoreboard, the eighth marks are the smaller marks are the blue ones. So the mark right next to the blue on the other side of the 4. So 4 1/8 and 8 1/4. And then I'm going to turn it 90 degrees to the left. And then these marks are at 3 3/4 and 9 1/4. So I made 2 score marks vertically, 2 horizontally. Well, it's not horizontal anymore, but it was when we started. 3 3/4 and 9 1/4. So 3 3/4 and 9 1/4. All right, and that is it for the scoreboard. Now, if your paper is anything like mine, sorry, I don't know how to get rid of that shadow. If your paper is anything like mine, it's kind of hard to see where you scored. So I encourage you to fold now. Just fold it so that you know you've got them scored in the correct spots and you've got some folds. And I'll open it up and do the same thing. Now, making sure that I've got my section that is 5 1/2 inches. I'll use this one because it's easier to see. I'm going to make sure I've got the section that's 5 1/2 inches on the inside. It is excellent. And my first score was at 3 3/4. So I want to make sure that I've got the correct. See, here we go. I am so glad I looked. Okay. This is the one that's 3 3/4. The one that's 3 3/4 is on your left-hand side. Your 5 1/2 is in the center. Okay. Now, this is something I do sometimes because it's kind of hard to see in that ditch, basically. So when you score, you've got a little line in the center of where you scored. And sometimes it's really tough to see that. So I'll take a pencil and I'll make a fine mark on there so that when I'm cutting, I can see where I'm cutting. Because that is the next step. You are going to cut a slot. Well, shoot, I should have used black. I can see it, but I'm not sure how well you can. I took my pencil and made a line in the ditch where I scored the first vertical score and the second vertical score from the bottom score line to the bottom of the page. So if I'm looking at this in quadrants or sections, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 quadrants. I put the lines for the cuts that I'm going to make in the bottom left quadrant and the bottom right quadrant, and I'm going to do the same thing up at the top. And again, it's just so that I can see where the ditch is, where my score lines are. This paper makes it kind of, well, not just this paper, a lot of paper makes it tough to see that. And I want to make sure I'm trimming out just where I want to trim. All right. Again, I don't know how well you'll be able to see it, but I can see it. And that's why I encourage you to do it if you want. And then I'm going to, again, remember, this is my left-hand side, so I want to make sure that I've got it oriented correctly. And then I'm going to cut a thin line. If you have a Fiskars trimmer that allows you to do this, go for it, but this works just fine too. I'm going to cut, so if you can see the ditch, I'm going to cut just to the left of the score mark I made. I'm going to cut just to the right of the score mark. So I'm basically going to take out those little itty bitty slivers. Now, some people, this is a one sheet wonder because it uses one sheet of paper, but there are some small scraps left over at the end. You can save those and use them if you want, but actually these are small enough that I would probably toss them. So there's the one I cut just to the left of the ditch. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm sorry, I cut just to the right of the ditch. And now I'm going to cut to the left of the ditch. Don't usually hold this up to do it, but that's okay. And you can see this is about the amount that I take out. I don't know what is that, a 1/16 of an inch, something like that. And then I'll fold it down so that I cut straight, because if I tear it, I'll tear the paper. And then I'll cut down and trim that off. And that is about what I'm left with. And I'm going to do that for all 4 of those sections where I made the pencil line, those 4 score marks, and the upper right, upper left, lower right, lower left quadrants. All right. And if I had editing skills, I would zip through this so you didn't have to watch, but I don't have any editing skills, so there you go. That is a goal for this summer, but we will see what that looks like. And I'm cutting just up to and not past that score line that I made. Flip it around and do the same thing. And the last one. All right, so those are the slits that I made in this. And again, I want to make sure that I've got it, the 3 3/4 inch score is on my left side, and that's the correct one. I could look at the pattern paper and make sure that I did that right, but you know, that'd be easy. And then I'll come and take off these little slivers that I left, which is kind of silly in retrospect, because I'm going to cut off some of these top flaps too, but we'll just, for the sake of ease and getting it done correctly, I'll do this. And down on the bottom there was one more. Now, if you just want to pull it off, you can, but you might tear your paper, so just FYI. Okay. Here is the base of my pocket. Now, my next step, and you can see, I cut all 4 of those quadrants off. The quadrants that I just made, top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. I'm going to cut all 4 of those pieces off, and I'm going to use those pieces. I am not cutting off either the top or the bottom of the center quadrants. Just keep that in mind. So I'm cutting off my 4 corners basically. And again, I'm going to use this score line. Now, because I don't really usually put pencil mark in here, simply because I've got this as a guideline. You certainly could though if you wanted to, and you can use your trimmer if you want to, but you want to cut straight across all 4 of those pieces. Try to get that out of the way and not cut the microphone cord. All right. And you can see here, this is a great example. See how it's just to the left of that ditch? I'm going to trim off a little bit more. And then this last one. And if you don't cut it perfectly, like right here, I can easily trim that later. Now I'm saving these 4 pieces because we are using these for our pockets and flaps and such, okay? And I'm going to trim that right now because it's going to bug me. All right. Again, I want to make sure that my 3/4 inch is on the left. And then this is the inside of my folder. The part that's facing up is the inside of my little notebook, folio, what have you. The center flaps are going back and back. This is how the back is going to look. And then I'll put my disc here, I'll round those corners, and then that is my back pocket. Honestly, let's see, did I do that wrong? Because it's entirely possible. 3 3/4. Okay, so this is the one that's on the left. This is, yeah. Okay, let's try this again, Corey. It doesn't matter at this point. You want the piece that is just over 4 inches on your left side. And the reason for that is when you close this up, you want a little bit of a gap because your right side is going to go in first and your left side is going to be the cover. So you want the piece that's 4 and a little bit on your left when you're ready to do this part, because your closure is going to go here and you see how it lines up on the edge. So contrary to what I've told you before, you want the piece that is 4 1/8. Was it 4 1/8? 4 1/4. What was that? It is 4 1/8. You want the piece that's 4 1/8 inches wide on your left-hand side because that's going to be your closure. You want the piece that's narrower, 3 3/4 on the right, because that's going to fold in on the inside. So on your back, this is going to be the bottom of my pocket, the top of my pocket. We'll come, let's just do that now. What the heck? So to do this one, let me grab my corner rounder and I will ink. I would pretend, if this were me, I would ink everything, but I don't have to ink everything quite yet. Oh, I wasn't going to take quite that big of a corner, but that's okay. This will work too. I rounded my corners just because rounded corners are happy things. And I will put my circle divot here. And the way I do these, I usually have a bunch of them done, and I moved it, so this is my like 3rd or 4th take on this video. And the way I do these for new people, these are just little circles. I'll use either a 5/8 or 3/4 inch circle punch, and I will piece of scrap chipboard, punch a disc, and then I will use some thinner paper, whatever patterned or colored paper or what have you I want. Now this one's pretty thin, so I should put a piece of paper on top or fold it over or something to get it to, and of course, oh, here's a piece of scrap paper. Here we go. I'll put another piece of like scrap paper behind it so that it doesn't tear when I punch it. Give it a little bit of thickness or tooth. Like if you're going to use vellum or something, especially something thin, you get a better punch if you use something a little thicker behind it. And I suppose I could, and I'll still save this. It's not like it's wasted. I'll save that for another circle disc for another time. And then I'll take the thicker piece, the thinner piece, I will glue those together. And then depending on how I intend to put this on the back pocket, I'll either punch a hole for an eyelet, because I need a little bit bigger hole, or I will poke a hole with a tool like my awl for a brad. All right, so that's how I make my disc closures. And let's move all that stuff out of the way. Okay, too much mess. Mess has to go away. I am not going to ink these just for the sake of time, but normally I would ink at this point. All right, I'm going to use my grid. Okay, too much mess. I'm going to use my grid to center my disc, my divot. And this is just a smidge over 4 inches wide, just a smidge. I don't know if you can see it right there. And so I want to go halfway in between there and right here. And again, I don't, measure it perfectly. I just kind of eyeball it, but I use my grid to help me. And I want that to go right about here. So I'm going to make myself, I'm going to use a brad. No, I'm not. I'm using an eyelet, but you can use a brad. So I'll make myself a dot, and then I will punch a hole and line that up with the center. And now I will, I think I've got one in here. I do. Good. Sometimes when I'm using little pieces, I'll put them all on a dish beforehand, knowing that I need them. Actually, I need that next, so I'll leave it out. And then I'll put the eyelet through the center of that disc that I created. And then I will put this on here. Maybe I'll put it on here, get it in the right spot. Okay, so eyelet, and then I clamp it closed. And that is eyelet on. Okay, now the bottom, you have a choice. On one of them, this one, I made it a gusset. See, I made it so that you can expand that pocket. On this one, I just glued it flat. So you have a choice. If you want it to be flat and glue it flat, just glue each edge and fold it down. If you want a gusset, well, then you can put in a gusset. Because the gusset requires an extra step, I'm going to show you how to do that. This is so much easier to ink first. I promise not to ink the whole thing, but this is way, way, way easier to ink in advance. So I'm going to do that. All right, to make the gusset, I just took a piece of scrap card and I made 3 score lines. I scored in the center, and then I scored, well, you can see it better on this side. I made 1, 2, 3 score lines about 1/4 of an inch apart. on a roughly 1-inch piece of paper, 1 1/4, something like that. It doesn't matter. It's a scrap. You just want to have 2 flaps for the sides, and you want to have 3 score lines. So when it's laying flat like this, your center score you fold in half, and then your 2 side scores you fold in back. So basically you're making a mountain or an M or a W, just depending on which way you're looking at it, okay? And that is all you do to make your gussets. Then I will come, I'm gonna get a smaller scissor, there we go. Then I come in and I want to glue it down here. Now it doesn't have to be the exact height. You can make it a little tiny bit smaller and it'll work just fine. So I'm going to do that. Okay, maybe I'm going to do that. Whoa, they flew. Okay, I'm going to show you one gusset because the other one's on the other side of the camera. And then I'll take off a little bit on the corners like that. And then I'll put glue down on these 2 flaps or hinges, whichever you want to call them. I like flaps simply because they flap. Put glue there and glue there. And you put these on the edge. Okay. On the edge of your bottom flap, and hold the glue in place until it's dry. And then I use my fingers to smear all that glue off. Right? No, don't do this yet. If you're following along, stop. Stop right there. Don't do it. I knew I was going to get sidetracked when I threw that, and I did. All right. I like my closure, my bottom closure. You can put another policy envelope closure right here and just do the string around that, but I like mine to feed through the bottom. You really want to do that before you glue it closed. Whew. So glad I did that before I did it. And if you're there, just don't glue that piece together, okay? All right. I'm going to come with the bottom hinge. So this is the top one where we've put the policy closure, and this is the bottom one. Before I glue this on, I am going to grab my pokey tool. And again, I want to go in about the center. So this is 4 inches, so at about 2 inches, and just to the bottom edge of the score line. I don't want it, I want it, here, look at, how do I want to say that? So here is the score line that I created. And what did I say was 2 inches? Where's halfway mark? Halfway mark is about right here. Okay. You can see my poke is just to the left, just to the bottom, just underneath. There you go. Just underneath that score line, just a smidge. And that's where I want to poke my hole. And you can use your needle or your pokey tool or what have you, but I'm going to poke my hole right there, just underneath it, underneath that score line. See, like so. Then I've got some string that I'm going to use for my closure on a needle, simply because it's easier. You can make a needle if you want to, it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to pull that through, and I'm going to pull it to the side. I don't want to leave it straight because it's easier to pull it out when it's straight. I'm going to turn it to the side just a little bit. And I use a piece of packing tape. You can glue or use whatever you want, but I use packing tape because I have it and I like it. Piece of packing tape, and I am going to tape that down, and I'm going to push to make sure it's tight. So you can't even see it. This is the inside of the pocket, right? Push it down to make sure it's tight. Now I am ready with my closure. See, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, now I do both of these at the same time, but again, I threw that and I don't want to go get it. So I'm going to show you just one of these. I can come back and put the other one in later. It's not a big deal. Glue that down, put the pin back in because this is our glitter glue and it's fussy. Okay. And now I would have both of these on here at once. If I were doing both, I would put both of these on, lay them down flat, and now I have a gusseted. Give it a second to dry. And now I have a gusseted pocket in the back. Okay. Here, you can see I left this, I could glue this one flat and have one gusset, but that would look kind of silly, it would be unbalanced. But I've got the gusseted pocket in the back. And again, if you didn't want a gusset, just glue it flat. Now, I'll put a bead or some beads or a charm or something on this and wrap it around. Wrap it around once, and there's my closure. that is how I do that. And it's one of the reasons I put the hole down in the bottom like that, because I just like the way it looks. And just like that. Okay, so that's the back. I'll take this string out. There we go, that way I won't poke myself. That is the back piece. Flip it over. You've got 4 pieces of paper left. None of them are long enough to make your side pocket and tuck. So you're going to have to put 2 pieces together. So you just kind of decide how wide you want it. This part is kind of up to you, basically. You decide how wide you want it. Like, I think it looks kind of funky to have it part of this image showing. So you just kind of play with what you've got. You've got a little bit of wiggle room. If I were using this piece is a little bit narrower, so I'm not going to get as much fold. So I want to use my wider pieces. I've got 2 wide pieces and I've got 2 narrow pieces, right? Those are, you can see they're all 4 different sizes because of the way we scored them, but I've got 2 that are wider and I've got 2 that are narrower. The 2 that are narrower are going to be, now see, if I had done this right, would have been really cool is to follow the same pattern and put the piece right here over it, the exact same piece, so it would have tucked, had been my tuck. But I didn't do that, and that's okay. Maybe I'll just use this one, this narrower piece, because they kind of go together. So maybe I'll do that. This will be my narrower piece tuck. And you can see right here, I've got a little bit, because of where I cut that hinge, I'm going to trim that down. I'm going to make that piece go away because it's not smooth and flat. All right, see, so I'm going to cut off that much. And I can keep it the same height if I choose to, and maybe I will. Maybe I will. I kind of like that. And then I'm just going to round this corner. And since I used the wide, I wasn't looking closely. This one I don't have marked like my other one. I broke one of the arms at the retreat, so I had to order a new corner chomper. So ink that, or corner around that. Ink the edge, because honestly it's way easier to ink before you glue it down. I can ink the bottom and the side later because those won't matter. Glue that down, and that piece is going to go here. That's going to be my tuck spot. I'll put that on. Remember, I've saved aside my 2 wider pieces, and we'll cobble those together in a moment. I'm going to glue, let's see if I'm in frame. Here we go. Glue on the bottom and glue on the side. And I'm going to put this corner tuck right here. And I like to clamp it just for a minute simply because I can, and then I can move on. I don't have to hold it. I just make sure it's lined up. It dries quickly. This is probably an unnecessary step, but I do it all the time and I like the hold I get, so that's why I do it. So we've got the left inside flap done, saving the 2 wide pieces for the right flap. And then I've got this piece right here, and this is where I created a pocket. And let's see, does it fit? It's a little narrow, but that's okay. It doesn't need to be perfect. And I can go either side. Which one do I like better? I kind of like, this is going to be covered, so it's not going to show. It's not going to compete. I don't like that. I don't like that it doesn't line up. So I'm going to go just like this. And again, so much easier to ink these before you glue them down. You could make this wider if you wanted to put a little bit of lace on here, but remember, this is the inside piece of a folio, so it makes it a little bit more challenging to add much bulk to it. So having it a little smaller is actually good. It doesn't have to fit the width of the the inside fold. So I'm going to put glue on 3 sides on this one because it's a pocket, not a tuck. And that is how I distinguish the 2. Maybe I'm the only one. No, that's not true, because sometimes tucks have their side tuck and not a pocket. I don't know. Maybe there's no difference between them. Maybe I just use them interchangeably. All right, glue 3 sides. Make sure I've got it mostly centered. And then I'm going to put this down here as my bottom pocket. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect by any means. And actually, since I'm going to put a paper insert here, that's pretty good probably, to not have it touch side to side. And I will clamp those down, and I'll pull these off. So I've got my left side tuck. I've got my center side pocket, and now I'm going to build this piece here. And you know, have options with that. Remember, none of this is going to show. I can decide how wide I want to make this or how narrow I want to make this, because all I'm doing is folding this over and matching them up. I kind of like that. And I kind of like that. All right. I have a little bit of wiggle room with these. I don't have to make sure everything matches perfectly. I have some flexibility. What I do want to do is make sure that the height is the same and that the width is the same. But I don't want to glue these together because that is creating my tuck. So I'm going to trim just a tiny bit off this so that the line matches. Now I have got a pattern on mine, so that's why I have to make it match. Yours may not have a pattern, and you may not need to make it match. But I want to. Okay. And let's see, I want it to be about, now I'll trim a little bit for sure, but I want it to be about the same height. Okay, so I am going to make sure it's not too short. It's not. I like the way that lines up. You almost can't tell that it's a pocket. So I'm going to do that. And it's going to be right below the ticket, and that'll be my reminder. And I'm going to ink this all the way along because, again, it's so much easier to ink before you glue. All right. I'm going to put glue on just this far right side. That's going to be my pocket. Just here, just to hold it in place while I finagle this piece. Now, could you use a different piece of paper, not from this one sheet, Wonder Business, and put a different? Of course. But one, I want to use up this whole piece, and two, I like the pocket and then the pocket. So that's why I chose to do this. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to put just a little bit of glue right here along the edge and glue those two sections together. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to trim so that these two pieces that I just overlaid on each other are exactly the same, because that's what's going to show when I glue it down. Okay, so I'm going to trim these and this. I want them to be the same size. All right, those are done. And again, I am going to ink these two sides because these are the sides that are going to make the tuck spots in the pockets, and easier to ink before you glue. All right, just a little bit of ink to make it stand out. Okay, here is that, and it's a little bit long, you can see, and I want to trim it so that, let me get my measurements, so that's right there, and I'm going to make a pencil. There you go, sorry about that. That's flush at the top. I like that little bit of white showing. So, or do I want the white gone? Maybe I want the white gone. Maybe I do. All right, so let's, and I can come in and trim it later too, but I'm going to, if I have a little bit of extra, I'm going to trim that off right now, just because I can. Okay. And I'm going to remove these clips. And here is where I'm going to just lay this where I want it, depending again completely on what image you've got on this, if you have any image at all. And I think I want this to be right here. Yeah, I like that. So I am going to measure it and score it so that that much will show. All right, you don't have to measure it. You can, I can use the grid underneath here, and I often do. But let's see, it is 2 5/8. So 2 5/8 is where I want to score this. I'll use my little scoreboard. 2 5/8. You know what? Just for the heck of it, I'm going to go 2 3/4. That'll give me a little bit of wiggle room because you do get some displacement when you score. So there we go, 2 5/8, scored it. And so my tuck and pocket on this side is going to be really narrow. Now, on the first one I showed you, I put a ruffle right here because it was real narrow like this. If I were going to put a ruffle on, this is where I would do it before I glued anything down. If I wanted to add another piece of paper, or like, here you go. So I'm going to lay this over here, and this is going to be my pocket and my side tuck. You know what? I made that way bigger than I needed to. I don't know what I was thinking, but I made it way bigger than I needed to. Maybe I measured wrong. Maybe I did. And that happens too. Yeah, see, I did. I measured wrong. This isn't 2.5. Well, you know what? Maybe I'll just rescore it. What the heck? That's the beauty of this type of paper. It's not going to show so much. I'm going to rescore this at 2.5 because that was really narrow. There we go. Now, solid paper, that score line would show. This paper, not so much. Okay, score it. Whoops, sorry about that. Score it. Yeah, and that's it. That's a bigger pocket here, but still, same idea. If I wanted to put a fringe or another piece of paper or something else on here, I would sew it on here now. And honestly, if I were doing this for my own, I probably would. Simply because, you know, I want that extra interest. But you don't have to. It's certainly not required. And this is where I'm going to attach this piece. And you can see I didn't trim quite enough. It's not an exact fit, but I'll come back afterwards. You can see here it just comes out a little bit. I'll come back and trim that. That's not a problem in the least. And I like the way that looks. I like that orientation. On this side, I don't love it. Honestly, I really don't, because I don't like the way they line up with the grid. So I'm going to fix it here. And oh my gosh, I'm making this ridiculously long. Let's see what kind of scraps I have. I'll just pull out one of my scrap bags, and lordy knows I have plenty of those. But I'm digging through my scrap bag, which is what you can't see because it's in my lap. Do I like the way that looks together? Not particularly. Well, and you know what? This is a reality check. This is what I do. I wonder if I have a piece of Braille paper, because that would be kind of cool. It's got texture, but it's got, those are little. They're not big enough. What would look good? I could put a ruffle. I could put lace. Here we go. Here's a piece of Braille paper, and it is long enough. All right. So what I'm going to do here to fix my, that's it. See, it was meant to be. To fix my error. I didn't like how the grid lined up, and I didn't like how, there we go. Maybe I'll do it. See, I'll do it like this. And I could sew it, but I don't think I'm going to. I think I'm just going to glue it. I'm going to glue this down right here. And it's, where is it? Okay. Put a bead of glue. See, and that's a way, actually it's probably good that I'm showing you this. It's a way that you can salvage what you've got. I mean, you don't have to, this happens. Everything doesn't go perfectly the first time, okay? And when it's me, it almost never goes perfectly the first time. But there's a way around it. Like, I didn't love that, so I'm going to change what I do. So here we go. I'm going to line that up. It's the right size piece. Make sure it's on there straight. Straight enough. Okay, I'm going to make sure this is glued. Is that wide enough? Yep, that's wide enough. It ends at a good spot. I like that little bit of yellow showing. Okay, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to make sure this is glued down in the back, underneath, so that it doesn't catch on anything when I use that as a tuck or a pocket. Glued it down. And now I will glue this edge, or ink this edge, excuse me. Ink, a little bit of ink. Okay, so what I did is I took that strip that I had and I widened it, simply because I didn't like where this landed on the back page. So I altered it. Okay, and now I can glue it down. See, and I like that. I like the little bit of yellow showing. I like the fact that I have, this is not a double tuck, right? Because I had to glue that piece together. But I still have a single tuck right here. I have a nice big tuck. And I still have, where is that little itty bitty bit? Here it is. I haven't ruined this. This is still a pocket. Okay? So I've got my pocket on the top, and I still have my tuck on the side. And now I'll glue this piece down. So I like the way it looks on the front. I'm going to trim that just a tiny smidge because of where this little blue line is. And yeah, I didn't plan that out, obviously. Winging it on the fly. Okay, there we go. That's better. ink. All right, now we're finally gluing. Okay, this is the piece that's just going to go over the edge. Okay, and I don't want to glue here because that's going to be my tuck spot. So I'm just gluing at the top and the bottom. Make sure it's tucked up tight against that edge. And I'm going to justify one edge. Like on this case, I'm going to justify, there we go. I like that the lines line up. So I will glue that in place. Did I not ink that? I guess I thought I did, but maybe I didn't. But that's okay. I can go back and do it later. It's not impossible. It's just not as easy. All right. Inside flap. I'm going to come do the same thing on the outside and glue just the bottom and top edge. Am I in frame? Nope. There we go. Bottom and top edge. And there you go. And I'm going to clamp those simply because there's two pieces and they're thick. And I'm spilling glue everywhere. That's the beauty of working on a glass mat. Somebody had asked about, or a couple people I think, had asked about these glass magnetic mats. I found them, and I'll put the link in below, at glassboardstudio.com. Glassboardstudio.com. And if you choose to, you can use the discount CORI, C-O-R-I, 20, and you'll get 20% off your order. I like mine, but it's very similar to the Tim Holtz. One of the reasons I got it is it's wider, and you have choices, size choices depending on your workstation. It is longer and wider than the Tim Holtz board, and it's magnetic. And sometimes I really like to be able to line things up and hold them in place with magnets. And yeah, I'm very, very pleased with it. So I'll put that in the link below as well, or in the description box below as well, if that's something that you might be interested in. Okay, see, now I was talking. Oh, no, good. Whew. Whoa. Okay. I almost should do this again, but I won't, because this is reality and this is what happens. I'm super glad I didn't glue this side, that I made my gusset fly, because this is where the closing flap goes. This is where the piece to hold the journal closed goes. And I almost always glue it underneath this. Now you don't have to, you can just put it next to it on the back, but I'll show you what I mean in just a second. Okay, that's glued enough. We're going to call that done. And I was going to trim this, wasn't I? I'll come in and trim this piece because it wasn't a perfectly flush match. Okay, there we go. Now it's flush, and I'll come back and ink everything later. But the basic construction so far, where we are so far. This is the back. Inside, the right flap is the inside closure, the left flap is the outside closure. Around the back, you have your flip up. This is where, well, here, I'll use this piece since I have it in my hand. We'll call this my closure. I'm going to fold this up and fold this up, and you just need a little scrap, right? Use this, fold this up, and what I generally do is tuck it back under here before I glue this down, and I didn't look at my directions to remind you of that step, so it worked out well that I threw this gusset. You can move it up. It doesn't have to, it can be like this, because remember, it's going to be underneath your flap. It's not going to show. I just like to put it here because when I lift this up, it doesn't show either. I mean, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But basically, this is where I put it. Now, you don't have to even use this closure. You can tie it if you choose to, or you can use another form of a closure. This is simply what I'm doing. So I'll tuck a piece in and fold it down, and that will end up being my front closure. So remember, I just folded it, and I'm going to glue it in place. And I do that just to make it a little bit thicker, because it's going to get the most use out of anything in here. The opening and closing. And you saw this was just a leftover scrap from that barrel paper I used to extend my pocket page. It's not anything more fancy than that. This isn't perfectly straight, so let's trim that up. Make sure it's nice and tightly glued. And then, where I folded it, I'm going to tuck that back here. Now, it's not going to be centered, you'll see, because the pocket isn't that big, but I actually prefer it not centered, done this way. So that's why I did it like that. Glue on the small little flap that's going to be tucked underneath my pocket, like that. And I will clamp that. Give it a moment to dry. Now, it's kind of ironic. Art glitter glue dries really, really quickly, but I still tend to clamp it anyway because I just like to give it a little extra help to have a nice tight bond. All right, so then this will be the cover. That's going to be the back. And then this will be the cover up on the closure, right? I've got it clamped so you can't see that. The last step, and this is completely optional, is the page insert. And I put them, here we go. I just took some plain paper, folded it in half, and it's going to be sewn in here. Now I'm going to show you my two, rather than saying it. Goliath is a huge machine, and I'm not going to bring him over. The other one's at the shop. So you just want to measure your height. You want to make it maybe 1/4 of an inch smaller than your total height. You can make it flush if you want to. I just like it a little tiny bit smaller. So I'll trim down probably, what, 1/2 inch off the top. And you want to make sure that it doesn't, when you're putting your insert in, you want to make sure it doesn't catch on the inside when you're folding, opening and folding this. So I'd probably trim down 1/8 of an inch right here. And I will show you these two. I sew it in, I open it up, and I sew it in on my machine with a straight stitch right down the middle. I clamp, right? Clamp my pages, top and bottom, and then I sew a line straight down the middle. And I use, this machine doesn't have it, which is one of the reasons I'm not doing it, but I use a wider single stitch. I make it as wide as mine will go, and that'll keep it from perforating. On this one, here we go. On this one, you can see, here's the stitching, and here is the center of that. Oh, maybe. There it is, there's the center. So you can see I made this a wider single stitch, and it just holds it in place. You can do the same exact thing, same orientation, and use a 3 or a 5 hole pamphlet stitch. Now on this one, I put a piece of washi over the top. On this one, I did not. I have it sewn, and you can't even see it. I mean, maybe you can, but I can't see it. And here, I did the same exact thing. I used the same paper. I sewed right down the middle, and these stitches are really too tight because this could easily perforate, but that's what Goliath does. So I've got the single stitch right down the middle, and here, because I sewed it right on the seam and I inked it, you can't even really tell. So when you're done, you can choose to cover it with washi or not. That's up to you. When I put these in a journal, because remember, I'm going to do 5 different of these one-page wonders are going to go inside of a journal. This is the piece that is going to be sewn inside the journal. So I actually wouldn't put washi on here because I don't need to. This is the piece that is going to be, well, actually maybe on this one, maybe, you know what? It doesn't even matter. It could be this one simply because I've already got the insert sewn here. So when I sew this in my book, I may sew it in right here to open this way. We'll see. That's down the road a little bit. But my point is, this is where you add the insert. You add just like you would any other signature in any other journal project, and it's going to show right here. And then this lays down flat like this. Fold. Oh, this is too big. I haven't trimmed it down. Fold. Okay. Assuming I trimmed it down, it's sewn in. Fold, fold, and then I'm going to put a Velcro dot right here. Okay, I'd ink it first. And oh my gosh, this is long. I apologize. I talk too much, but again, this is the reality of, you know, what I do. Sometimes I make mistakes as I go, and like here, you can't see where well, maybe you can, but I can't see where I scored it initially. It doesn't show, and where I changed my mind on this kind of paper. And so I've got this pocket here, here, and that is that. I talked about the Glowforge. I think that answers every question. It's going to be a little bit, again, with the end of the school year before I can come back, but this was allegedly a fairly quick project. And yeah, make mistakes as you go and alter them and fix them as you go and just have fun with it. Thank you all very much for watching. I appreciate your kindness and your support. Take care and happy creating.